Second one is I have a plan to put $50 billion into new schools, into upgrading our
Coming
schools.
down like perfect. I'm supposed to be Chewbacca the Wookiee, but I look like a big down coat. No. Of course, who knew I would grow up to look like Chewbacca the Wookiee? So that's all right. I mean, but first, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to really introduce, before Andrew gets here, and he's just a couple minutes away, two people that I know very well and I respect very much. These people have served our country and have signed up to make the ultimate sacrifice. And, oh, Jim's gonna, I thought Jim already got to talk. Well then, let's talk about some other people who also make the ultimate sacrifice, which is our union members. Because I will tell you this, being a former union member, we need to support our unions. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Jim.
Hi, Jim Chance. I'm president here at UAW Local 893 in Marshalltown. We'd like to welcome you to our union hall, along with Vice President Chad Green and Guy Greg Ecker. I'm going to hand this over to the Veterans for Yang.
Hi, everybody. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for coming. I'm Heidi, and this is Greg. We are with Veterans for Humanity. We are Andrew Yang's veterans group. I will tell you, when I first heard about Andrew Yang, it was kind of like with probably a lot of you guys, if we have Yang Gang here, it's the same thing you guys went through. You watched a video and you just immediately loved him. Like his personality, his commitment, his authenticity really came through, and you just fell in love with him. As a veteran, I'd been keeping an eye on the various candidates and their policies and how they wanted to help veterans, and so I looked up Andrew Yang's policies. And not only did I get a policy page, I got a blog post, okay, that is about 10,000 words. It's massive. And it's not like with other candidates. It was with other candidates you get a lot of fluff, and they're trying to just appeal, and it's not very substantive so far. His More Than a Handshake post on yang2020.com is amazing. It goes through all of his veterans policies, and it's in detail down to his reverse boot camp. He talks about helping service members when they leave the military. When we go into boot camp, you go through training that it puts you in a certain mindset for the military, and then when you leave the military, you have to learn to be a civilian again. And he goes into great detail about all of these things. And like I said, it's not fluff. It is, here's the problem, here's what we're gonna do. Here's the problem, here's what we're gonna do. And it's absolutely amazing. I recommend you guys read it. Veterans for Humanity, we love Andrew. We actually polled our veterans and we asked them, what do you like about Andrew? And one thing that they said was, we kind of understand the Freedom Dividend because a lot of veterans receive compensation payments. Okay, so we already know what having this money does for our families. It's allowed it's allowed the veteran to heal when they left the service. If they had service-connected injuries, it allowed them to focus on their health and healing. It allowed them to stay home with children, with family. It allowed a spouse to stay home. It allowed them to focus on education. It allowed them to not worry if they had, if their car broke down or things like that. So veterans understand it, and we want these things for everyone else. We know what having that money does. So I'm gonna hand the microphone over to Greg, and he's gonna talk a little bit about unions and veterans policies.
Hello, everybody. I'm Greg Koenig. I am an Iowan. I'm a proud union member, and I am a veteran. And I love Andrew Yang for so many reasons. I will tell you that first off, I'm a parent of an autistic child. What initially drew me to Andrew's candidacy was the fact that he has policies specific to children with special needs. As a parent, he speaks heavily about the need to provide an environment for our children that's safe, that's welcoming, and that health care is accessible for everyone. It's very important. As a union member, I will tell you that, especially speaking here in a UAW hall, think about what the Freedom Dividend could do for striking union workers, okay? Right now, these folks that were in the UAW strike were making $250 every week that they're trying to sustain themselves on. Imagine what that Freedom Dividend would give them. It would empower them from the strength of being able to protest, to be able to give them more leverage against their employer. Right now, they just wait for them to cash out, so to speak, and that they'll just, eventually we'll weed them out. But, that gives them a heck of a lot more power from that standpoint. But also as a veteran, advocating on behalf of veterans is so important to me. Right now, VA has about a 45,000 provider shortage, and trying to get health care in the VA is extraordinarily difficult. Congress recognized that, which is why they passed the Choice Act, which allows certain veterans to receive local care and provide provisions to that. But it kind of skates by the issue, that we still have this massive hiring shortage within our VA healthcare system. So being able to recruit and retain qualified care providers into the VA healthcare system is such a big deal. And Andrew has policies on the more than a handshake blog post that that Heidi was talking about a bit ago. So I would just encourage you all to consider those options and listen to the man. He has over 150 policies on his website, okay? He's not just about rhetoric, he's about substance. He's a problem solver. These are, the critical issues of our time, and he's got a policy for just about everything, so, all right. Oh, math. Math stands for Make America Think Harder. So, yeah, that's definitely the slogan of the campaign, and he definitely has those solutions to be able to help veterans out in that regard and to help everyone out in that regard. So anyway, trying to think what else we could talk about.
If you guys are interested in learning more about what veterans are doing to support Andrew Yang, you can go to veteransforyang.com. This is our website. You can get if you want a shirt or something like that, or if you know a veteran, send them to the website. We'd love to have them. It's hard for a lot of our veterans to be out here doing what we're doing right now, and I can speak for myself when I say it's a big thing, and that's how important this is. That's how important Yang's presidency is. You've got the veterans out here. So.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, I'll tell you one other thing, guys. It's so important to me as a vet. We've been in Afghanistan now for 18 years. There are service members over there that were not even born on 9/11. Andrew has pledged to end the forever wars. Okay, think about that and how that money that we spend on defense could be, resurfaced into providing social safety programs, to providing, safety networks for all of our poor. And the man genuinely wants to eliminate poverty. Name one other candidate that has, the programs that he has presented to eliminate poverty. That's, again, one of the primary focuses. So, again, we're happy to be here and here. A little longer, okay. Oh, sure, he's making the rounds. Okay, so.
Does anybody have any questions for the
Does anybody have questions for us? No, that's okay.
We love Andrew. We love his policies. Like I said, more than a handshake blog post. Read it, but set aside some time. Just like anything you do with Andrew Yang, just like your night's gone because you're going to be reading that all night. But it's so substantive, and we absolutely love Andrew.
Yes, sir.
Just one other question.
Sure.
How do you see
Oh, that's an interesting question. The question was, how do we see Pete Buttigieg versus Andrew Yang? What I will tell you is, Pete's a veteran. He's obviously provided, service to his country. The reason why we support Andrew has more to do with the substance of policy. Being a veteran is of course important, but it's not enough for me personally to just say, yes, I will support that candidate, versus someone who has substantive policy that will, move veterans forward.
We love Pete, obviously, as a veteran. We appreciate his service, and we're Yang Gang, so we love Andrew Yang, and he said veterans we're growing more and more every day, coming out in support of Andrew. So, anyone else? He's ready. Okay, what you guys have all been waiting for. I am very proud to announce what is hopefully our future Commander-in-Chief, Andrew Yang! What was that? You guys got me for another 5 minutes, sorry. All right, does anyone have any other questions for the veterans? Like, we can talk about veteran stuff all day. Go ahead. No more trick questions.
Specific policies that Andrew Yang has as opposed to Pete does regarding investment, typically prefer these policies over other policies?
Andrew just has such in-depth policies. Like you can tell, like, and I know Pete does too, but Andrew really sat down and looked into this. And like I said, if you check out this blog post, it is so, like, it identifies the problems. It identifies problems that veterans have with their educational benefits. As someone that is currently using the GI Bill, I can't tell you how many times out of nowhere I've, when your school is supposed to be paid, or when you're supposed to receive your stipend, it doesn't show up, He addresses those issues, and
Ladies and gentlemen, now appearing live.
2 minutes. Okay. So something he's also that I'm really excited about is he wants to help veterans with businesses, and our rates of veterans starting businesses has fallen in recent years, and he wants to revive that. So, like I said, just check out this blog post. I probably could have read it to you by now. But we love him so much. He's just it's facts, it's math, it's numbers, and we're used to kind of having people talk to us and try and speak about veterans, and a lot of times there's not substance, and this is what I really appreciated, is it's pure substance. So yeah, absolutely check it out and save like 2 hours.
Yeah, the entrepreneurship, I mean, we're talking about somebody who, has started Venture for America, was a nonprofit. He knows about building businesses. He knows about creating jobs. Who could be better at helping people start businesses than someone who has already had significant expertise and experience within that field, okay? The other one in particular I'll say is, he starts with focusing on transitions right when they're getting out of the military. There is such a large adjustment period, that people have to face, when they're getting ready to prep to switch from being in the military to being a civilian, and starting those programs to help them is tremendous. Yep.
All right, and now, third time is always the charm, right, ladies and gentlemen? Here he is, the man of the hour, Mr. Andrew Yang.
Yes, it's real. I'm here for reals. Hello.
So good to see you.
So good to see you as well. Thank you all so much for being here. I feel like this mic's a little bit unnecessary. There aren't that many of us, right? You can pretend it's a stadium. Hello all, I'm Andrew Yang. I'm running for president as a Democrat in 2020. How many of you have seen me speak before in some context? Oh my gosh, so many of you. That's fantastic, I suppose. So those of you who are like smiling and being like, not me. I'm going to give a combination of remarks then for the people who've heard me before and the people who've just come here really because you're curious. And I'd love to take advantage of the fact that it's a relatively small group of us to take questions, get to know each other a little bit, and really have a sense as to what brought you here today. Aside from the fact that we're here in Iowa, and here politics is like a combination of like sporting events and like community gathering and education all rolled into one. I've been joking throughout my time here that Iowans are a special breed because this is one of the only places where democracy still functions the way it's intended. This is CBS, I want to say. Is that right? Someone want to help him? I'll help him.
I will.
Thank you. That's Iowa nice.
Appreciate it. Sorry about that.
Well, not at all, man. I mean, you can't be lugging that thing through a door by yourself. It's not easy. That's what happened to our news networks. They used to send teams. Now it's like one person. Anyway. Oh, really? No, it's true. It's a sign of the times. So here in Iowa, you all are very, very lucky and privileged and accustomed to being a place where democracy actually works the way it's intended, where your votes matter in a way, frankly, many other Americans' votes do not matter. Where most Americans look up and they see the pipes just clogged full of corporate cash and lobbyist influence. And most Americans look up in despair and say, there's not much that I can do about that. People will come and say, oh, if you vote this way, and they're like, oh, I'm not sure it's going to actually make a difference. But here in Iowa, you all can flush the pipes. It's an amazing power you have. It's really the envy of a lot of the rest of the country. Now, you're a little bit accustomed to it. You're like, I don't know about that Yang fellow. I only met him the one time. You know, you like used to having people in your living room. You'd be like, oh, you know, like you see us in a way, hopefully, that gives you a better insight as to who we are and what makes us tick. And what makes me tick is the fact that I see what lies ahead, not just here in Iowa, but around the country, and I felt compelled to do something about it. Oh, how did I arrive at that? My parents, I'm going to go down memory lane, some even pre-memory lane. My parents immigrated to this country as graduate students. They met in grad school at Berkeley out in California. My father's a physicist. He generated 69 US patents over his career for GE and IBM. My mom got a master's in math and statistics, so I was a very, very nerdy kid. And when I was growing up, I thought everyone's dad had a PhD. So I was like, oh, what's your dad's PhD? And I learned the hard way that wasn't true. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, oh, like 6-year-old me being like, what did I say wrong? So I grew up a very nerdy kid in upstate New York with an older brother. And we were told, get good grades, do well in school. That was the path to success. So I tried my best to follow that advice. I went to college in New England, studied economics and political science, didn't know what to do, so I went to law school. Didn't know what to do, so I became an unhappy corporate attorney for 5 months. Thought that was a really crummy job. And I know that sounds very, very lofty, being like, oh, I'm sure it was a good job. But what I try and explain to people is that at least the legal job I took, the main focus was trying to imagine what would go wrong. Imagine if you had to go into an office and try to think about the worst things that could happen so you could try and contract against them. And so I had this I was like, why am I in this office trying to think about all the worst things that could happen to this deal? Like, I should be trying to do something positive and build something. And so I left that job to try and start a business. How many of you all have started a business or club or organization or a mailing list or anything under the sun, really? Just raise your hand if you've started something. So if you've started anything, you know two things. One, it's much harder than anyone tells you. And two, when someone asks you how it's going, what do you say? It's going great. There's really only one answer to that question, it turns out. Because if you say it's not going great, then it'll be like, oh, I definitely don't want to join that club or buy from you. Or so you're always like, it's going great. And my business went great until it failed. And my parents were telling people I was still a productive lawyer because they're Asian. And it was an easier story. So my business had crashed. I owed people I owed school loans of 6 figures because it's not like that disappeared. And you go to law school, it's very expensive, and then you leave the job and the loans are still there. But I'd been so invigorated by this process of trying to start a company, even though I'd failed, I said, I have to try and get better at this. So one question is, how the heck would you try and get better at starting a business if you had just failed? So to me, what I did is I said, well, I should try and find someone better than me at this and then become that person's sidekick. So I found an entrepreneur who had more experience than me and then became his sidekick for 4 years. And then I became the head of another company that did quite well, grew to become #1 in the United States and was bought by a bigger company in 2009. Now, how many of you were here in this part of Iowa in 2009, it's about 10 years ago? I can't believe the financial crisis was 10 years ago. Can you all believe that? I'm sure it was a hard time in this part of Iowa, those of you who just had your hands up, because it was a hard time in most of the country. You saw people losing their homes all over the place, and I thought I had some insight as to why the economy crashed 10, 11 years ago. It was because all of these wannabe whiz kids I'd gone to college and law school with had gone to Wall Street to create these exotic financial instruments that had helped crash the economy. And so I said, okay, that's terrible, that's a train wreck. We have to have something better for people to do than that. And so I quit my job and started a nonprofit called Venture for America with the goal of helping young people start businesses in Detroit, St. Louis, Cleveland, Birmingham, Baltimore, and other cities around the country. Now, as someone who tried to start a business and failed, I thought, well, it's way too much to ask someone to move to a new city and start a business. Like, that would never work. But I thought what would work is if I were to take them, send them or train them, and then send them to a new city, not to start a business, but to work at a business that was just getting its legs under it. And then if they could work at that business for a couple of years, they would grow the way I had grown, because when I was a sidekick or apprentice, I learned a ton. So essentially the vision was to try and give everyone to the chance to learn under the wing of a more experienced company builder or entrepreneur. So I quit my job to start this organization, Venture for America. Ooh, is there a kid here? Yay. I'm a parent as well. I've got two boys, 7 and 4. So when I hear a kid crying, I have the same thought every parent here does, which is that mine? Right? And then in this case, I'm like, oh, no, it's not. So I quit my job to start this nonprofit, Venture for America. How many of you have worked in a nonprofit in some context? Yeah. So you have a sense as to what that looks like too. So I quit my job to start this nonprofit, and I started calling rich friends and asking them, do you love America? And then the smart among them said, what does it mean if I say yes to this question, Andrew? And then I said, at least $10,000. And then 12 of them said, I love America for $10,000. So I raised a couple $100,000, put some of my own money in, and then we launched this nonprofit that grew and grew to the millions, helped create several thousand jobs in 15 cities around the country, Detroit, St. Louis, Cleveland, Baltimore, et cetera. So much so that I was honored by the Obama administration as a champion of change. And I got to bring my wife to meet the president. So my in-laws were very excited about me for about a week. They were like, look at these pictures of our daughter with the president. My main story about President Obama was he has very large hands. You take his hands like envelops you, and you're like, oh. It's like, oh, I thought I had a normal-sized hand. So this was what I did for 7 years. Most people think of me as a business guy. I've actually been a nonprofit guy for the last 7 years. I grew up in upstate New York, went to school in New England. I had never been to Ohio and Louisiana and Alabama and Missouri and all these places that Venture for America brought me. And during those 7 years, I was blown away by the gulf between different parts of this country in terms of the way the economy has evolved. Where if you fly between Michigan and Manhattan or St. Louis and San Francisco, you feel like you're traversing decades rather than time zones sometimes. But I was still surprised when Donald Trump became our president in 2016. Some of you, I'm sure, were less surprised than I was because you saw many of your friends and neighbors and family members who were very excited about Donald Trump's candidacy. Being a numbers person and also looking at you're shaking your head, so you were not happy about it. And we are, we're in an environment, I imagine the majority of you reacted. How did you all react when Donald Trump won? Yes. Yeah. Tears, shock, disappointment.
I grew up outside of Philadelphia. We used to go to Atlantic City, and I watched, he destroyed that town.
Yeah, he's left a path of destruction, and
it's exactly the same thing.
Yeah,
It doesn't change.
And to me, the giant lesson, the red flag, was that tens of millions of our fellow Americans were so fed up with the system and business as usual that they decided to take a bet on the narcissist reality TV star. They said it cannot get worse than this current set of institutions that is not actually solving problems. I'm going to take a bet on this guy. I don't think most Americans who had any illusions. It's like Donald Trump wasn't really putting on a different type of show. I mean, we kind of knew what we were getting. I mean, I obviously didn't vote for him. I was a Bernie guy in 2016. But still, Donald Trump won, and so I said, okay, stop the press. I've been getting medals and awards and accolades for helping create thousands of jobs around the country, and I've had the sinking feeling that my work is like pouring water into a bathtub that has a giant hole ripped in the bottom. And I'd felt that, honestly, for months before Donald Trump wins. And then Donald Trump wins, and I'm like, holy cow. This is actually heading in the other direction much, much faster than even I had thought. and I started digging into the numbers. If you were to turn on cable news and ask why Donald Trump won, what is the explanation we're getting offered by the journalists and the cable news channels? Racism, Russia, Facebook, FBI, Hillary Clinton, DNC, Electoral College, Hillary again. So these are the reasons we're being offered by the press. But when I dug into the numbers, I found a very, very clear factor that to me drove Donald Trump's victory, including his victory here in Iowa by 8 points. The reason why Donald Trump won is that we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, and 40,000 right here in Iowa. And there's a straight line up between the adoption of industrial automation in a voting area and the movement to Trump. When a factory closes or a plant closes or cuts back in a town, blue goes to red in that community. You see not just the plant dry up, but what dries up as well? The shopping center, the property taxes. Like the entire community starts to go into a downward spiral, and then blue goes to red. So this has happened here in Iowa and in all of the other swing states that Donald Trump needed to win and did win. And unfortunately, what we did to the manufacturing jobs is now just picking up steam. How many of you have noticed stores closing around where you live here in this part of Iowa? Or wherever you're, some of you are from out of town. And why are so many of your stores closing? Amazon. That's right, Amazon. Amazon soaking up $20 billion in business every single year, closing 30% of America's stores and malls, including here in Iowa. The most common job in most of the state is working as a retail clerk. The average retail clerk is a 39-year-old woman making between $9 and $10 an hour. So if 30% of America's stores and malls close, what is that retail clerk's next move after her store closes? Well, it's not going to go work for another store because the store across the street's not exactly hiring and booming. How much did Amazon pay in federal taxes last year? Zero. Less than everyone here in this room. So that is the math. 20 billion out, zero back, 30% of stores and malls closed, #1 job in most of the country. How many of you have seen a self-serve kiosk in a fast food restaurant like a McDonald's? They're going to be in every location in the country by 2021, 2 years from now. Food service and food prep, 3rd most common job in the US. To me, the rubber hits the road when we automate truck driving. My friends in California are working on robot trucks that never need to stop. They tell me they're 98% of the way there. How many of you all know a truck driver here in Iowa? That's the most common job in over half of the states in the country. There are 3.5 million truckers in the United States, making about $46,000 a year, average age 49, 94% men. Now, I've talked to a bunch of truckers, and I know that when they drive a truck, they have to stop after 14 hours to get out and go to sleep. I also know that only 13% of truckers are unionized. That's not an industry where everyone's in a union. 87% are part of generally small mom and pop businesses. Many of the truckers actually took out massive loans to lease their cars, their trucks. So imagine if you owed $80,000 on a truck and then you saw the robot truck hit the highway that never needs to stop. Like going to be. He's saying smash your truck into that truck. I mean, this is real. There was actually a protest in DC by a series of truckers just the other week where they showed up and said, you cannot automate our jobs away. But you know what the financial incentives are to automate freight? $168 billion a year in cost savings. And that's not just labor, that's equipment utilization, fuel, fewer accidents, they say. I'm going to dig into this because I think it's important. So they say that they are 98% of the way to robot trucks. That sounds impressive, but having a 2% error rate is very problematic when you're talking about semi-trucks, because you can't have like trucks smashing into things and be like, oh, we were mostly right. That's not going to work very well. And the trucks are really bad with snow, because when it snows, the road markings get covered up and then the computer can't see it and then they don't know what to do. That's one reason why they're testing the robot trucks in Arizona. Because, in California, where there isn't a whole lot of snow. So the question is, how can they get over this last 2%? Do you remember the first time you saw TV on your cell phone? You remember that? First time you did that? That's 3G. We are now rolling out 5G around the country. And the vision they have for the robot trucks is to equip the truck with teleoperating software so that when the truck gets confused and doesn't know what to do, it alerts a teleoperator who's sitting in a warehouse in Nevada or Arizona, who then beams into the truck and drives it like a video game. You know what I mean? Because there are cameras in the front. So then it's like you're sitting there and it's like all of a sudden you can just see out the front of the cab. You take it over. And then when the computer's like, okay, I know what to do again, then you beam back out. What do you think the ratio will be between teleoperators and the 3.5 million Americans who drive a truck for a living right now? 1 to 10, 2%. It's certainly not going to be 1 to 1. You're not going to have like 3.5 million people away there. So what's that going to mean for the 3.5 million truckers or the 7 million plus Americans who work in truck stops, motels, and diners that rely upon the truckers getting out and having a meal? I was at Iowa 80 in Davenport. How many of you all have been there? Oh, they say 5,000 people stop there every day. What happens when that number starts to drop? Because the truckers are robots and they don't need to actually get out and have a meal. They tell me this is 5 to 10 years away. UPS just invested in one of these companies. $168 billion a year is enough money to move mountains, particularly in a country like ours where everything revolves around the almighty dollar. Now, this is not a Donald Trump problem. He is a symptom of the fact that we're going through the greatest economic transformation in the country's history, what people are calling the fourth industrial revolution. Here in Iowa, it started on your farms, which got gobbled up by mega farms and automated. And then it moved to the factories. You lost 40,000 manufacturing jobs in factories around the state. Now it's heading to your main streets as your stores start to dry up. And then it's going to hit your highways when the robot trucks come. These waves of automation and innovation are pushing more and more of us to the sidelines. And that is why Donald Trump is our president today. So this is what I'd unpacked in 2017. He wins. I have like a crisis of conscience where I'm like, okay, this is not a situation where I should just keep doing what I'm doing and being like, oh, this is going to go well. Because I'm an entrepreneur, and what entrepreneurs do in the best possible case is we solve problems. And the problem I was trying to solve was the fact that I did not believe that our economy was actually generating enough small business, entrepreneurship, and job growth. And then I realized that the problems are even bigger. And so I said, how do you solve that set of problems? So I went to Washington, D.C. with my facts and figures and my book and my PowerPoint deck. And I said to them, what are we going to do to help our people manage this transition? First, we had to explain to the American people it's not immigrants that are causing these problems. If you go to a factory in Michigan, it's wall-to-wall robot arms and machines. It's not wall-to-wall immigrants. And the same is true in Amazon fulfillment centers. Those things are also wall-to-wall robots. That's what's closing the malls and stores. And what do you think the folks in Washington, D.C. said to me when I asked, what are we going to do?
Nothing.
Yeah, I mean, nothing, it essentially was nothing. The three answers I got were these. Number one, we cannot talk about this. That's verbatim. Isn't that great? Number two, we should study that further. Number three, we must educate and retrain all Americans for the jobs of the future. And I said, okay, that one sounds halfway responsible. But I looked at the studies and the numbers. Do you know how effective the government-funded retraining programs were for the manufacturing workers who lost their jobs in the Midwest? 15%. 0 to 15%. That's right. Total dud. And when I said, look, the numbers say we're talking about 15, 20, 25% tops, you know what the next response was? I guess we'll get better. That's what passes for responsiveness out of DC. And one person in Washington, D.C. said something that sent me here to you all today. He said, Andrew, you're in the wrong town. No one here will do anything about this because fundamentally, Washington, D.C. is not a town of leaders, it's a town of followers. And the only way we will do anything about it is if you create a wave in other parts of the country and bring that wave crashing down on our heads. And I heard this and I said, challenge accepted. I'll be back. Like Arnold, I'll be back. I actually didn't say it, like I didn't say it Arnold style or anything. I just heard it. I'm just so glad I had someone with me when he gave me this little speech, because you'd think I was making it up, right? You'd think it's like, oh, this is some kind of like made up movie supervillain speech. Oh, it was just a DC lobbyist speech. Turns out they're kind of similar. But it's real. This is what he said. And when he said this to me, I actually got that feeling you have when someone tells you a deep and important truth. Because he's right. Washington, D.C. will do nothing about this. The only way anything will change is if we create a wave in other parts of the country and bring it crashing down on their heads. And that's why Iowa is such an incredible place, because this is a place where you all have outsized power to actually change the course of history and bring a different vision to the rest of the country, just like that. That's why I love being here. You go a lot of other places, people don't think they can make that kind of difference, but here you know you can. So the question is, how do you actually help the American people manage this economic transformation, this fourth industrial revolution? And those of you who are here today, at some point you heard that there's an Asian man running for president who wants to give everyone $1,000 a month. Remember that? And the first time you heard that, you were like, ha ha, that's a gimmick. That will never happen. But this is a deeply American idea from our founding. Thomas Paine was for it at the founding of the country, called it the citizen's dividend. Martin Luther King fought for it in the 60s, called it the guaranteed minimum income for all Americans. 1,000 economists endorsed it in the 60s. It was so mainstream, it passed the US House of Representatives twice in 1971 under Richard Nixon, called the Family Assistance Plan. And then 11 years later, one state passed a dividend where now everyone in that state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year, no questions asked. And what state is that? Alaska. And how does Alaska pay for it? Oil. And what is the oil of the 21st century? Technology, AI, self-driving cars and trucks. A study just came out that said that our data is now worth more than oil. How many of you saw that study? It was in a Netflix documentary. It's called, I believe, The Big Hack. Great Hack? I don't know the name of the doc.
Yeah, The Big Hack.
Big Hack. It's something, you can probably find it. How many of you all have Netflix? Try that. Or I should say access to a Netflix password, because I know how it works. So you can, it's a pretty good documentary. I mean, I enjoyed it. So that was one of the studies it cites in the documentary. It says our data is now worth more than oil. Now, one question I'm asking is like, who got their data check in the mail last month? And obviously none of us did. All of the data checks are going to Facebook, Amazon, Google, and the big tech companies are just hoovering it up to the tune of tens of billions of dollars. Now, I'm just like you all. When you subscribe to these tech services, you never read that boilerplate. You just say, get out of my way, and you hit I agree, I consent, I agree, I consent, right? And of course, we all do that. Like, we're not crazy. What else are you going to do? So all of this agree, consent, what they're doing is they're taking our data, and then they're packaging it and selling it and reselling it, and then occasionally they get hacked. And then you see the headline being like, hey, Yahoo got hacked, or this person got hacked. And then you're like, oh, man, does that mean I have to change my password? All right, that's about it. And then you're like, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. You're like, yeah, what's the worst that could happen? Really? And then you have this hodgepodge of passwords because some of them have like changed their protocol. Every time they ramp up their protocol, it's probably because they had a problem, honestly. Every time you show up to a company, it's like, hey, we think you should kind of consider changing your password. Make it really complicated. You should know that probably means that they lost your stuff. Oh, seriously. I mean, that's what's going on. And this is the world we now live in the 21st century, where we traded our data for convenience and these services. And it seemed like a great deal because you're like, oh, it's free. But I'm here to tell you it is not free. There's a lot of money changing hands, and we are not seeing any of it. And it's becoming fundamentally even more dangerous because they now know so many things about each of us that they can actually lead us like with these little breadcrumbs towards various actions that you don't even realize it's happening because you're like, oh, I always wanted to go to Bermuda. It turns out like somehow they've been like sending you things to get you to Bermuda. Oh, or in politics, it's obviously, you know, fundamentally more corrosive. So this data dividend, one of the proposals I'm championing is that our data should be ours. If we lend it to the tech companies, it doesn't mean it's theirs, not ours. And if they're profiting from it, they need to tell us and they need to share it with us. And also, they need to let us turn it off if we want. So those are some of the big proposals that I'm championing as part of this campaign to try and balance the scales, because we are completely outgunned by the tech companies right now, and the only way to balance it is through the government. The government has to make sure that Amazon does not pay zero in taxes, that we're all getting a fair share of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad, every robot truck mile. And this would be enough to fund the $1,000 a month dividend for each of us, particularly because when this money comes into your hands in 2021, how are you actually going to spend the money in real life? Car repairs, bills, fixing a home, heat, trips to Bermuda. Oh, look. My hidden sponsor, the Bermuda Tourism Bureau. I'm just going around incepting people in Iowa, New Hampshire, being like, it's a great place to visit this time of year. How much of the money would stay right here in Iowa? A lot of it, most of it, not all of it. Some of it would float up to the cloud. You'd buy an extra blender on Amazon, like get your own Netflix password because you're tired of sharing. But most of it would stay right here in Iowa. It would go to daycare expenses and Little League signups and car repairs you've been putting off. And it would end up infusing Main Street businesses and nonprofits and families with resources that would create and sustain jobs right here in Iowa. This is the trickle-up economy. From our people, our families, and our communities up. This makes us all participants in and beneficiaries of the 21st century economy. Because right now, there are like two sets of rules going on. There's the rules for the big companies, and then there's the rules for us. If the big companies screw up, it's like, no one can hold them accountable. It's like we screw up all of a sudden, they like push you into the, like push you into the ditch, being like, it's all your fault. And 21st century economy is evolving in very, very fundamental ways. I spoke to 70 CEOs in New York, and I asked them, how many of you are looking at getting rid of your back office, clerical, and call center workers and replacing them with AI and software? Guess how many hands went up out of 70? All 70 of them. The fact is, you could fire that CEO if he wasn't at least looking at making that deal. It was mainly guys. It was a room full of guys, honestly. That's just the nature of the system we have built. We have built a system of capitalism that worships the almighty dollar and the bottom line. And the pretense is that if the almighty dollar and the bottom line benefit, that we benefit too. There was a point in American history where that was kind of true. There was a point when if a company made lots of money, it would hire more people, it would invest in more plants, it would give those people full-time benefits, it would care about what happened in its own backyard, and we would benefit. This is like the Henry Ford, I'm going to pay my workers enough to buy my car. Remember that stuff? Yep. In today's economy, none of this is true anymore. I can have a vastly profitable company and not hire lots of people. If I do hire lots of people, I make them all temp, gig, and contract workers. Let's call them Uber drivers. And I say, like, hey, I'm definitely not going to pay for healthcare for these folks. I don't care about what happens in my own backyard because I kind of sell everywhere. There's no place I need to look out for anymore. So the rules of capitalism are now breaking down. And our job has to be to try and rewrite them to work for us. I'm a parent, how many of y'all are parents? I sense a bunch of you. If you're a parent, you sense that we are leaving a real mess for our kids. That we're leaving them like a shambles. And if you want some numbers, if you were born in the 1940s or 50s in this country, there was a 93% chance that you were going to live a better life than your parents in terms of socioeconomic income, success, that sort of thing. If you were born in the 1990s, you're down to a 50-50 shot. And that number is dropping quick. So it went from 93% to 50%, and now it's below 50%. So this is not just the feelings we have, it's actually the reality. And it's going to be up to the folks here in Iowa to say enough is enough. We actually have to try and rewrite the rules to work for us. That's why something that seems so dramatic, like all of us getting $1,000 a month, starts out as like, a gimmick or pie in the sky. But when you start digging in, you realize that it's necessary and inevitable. That if we don't take this set of steps, the winner-take-all economy is going to zero out more and more of us. And one of the things I'm saying is, look, it doesn't matter if I'm a hardworking, conscientious truck driver or a not so hardworking truck driver. The robot truck can outdo me either way. This thing never needs to sleep. So we have to start evolving in the way we think about ourselves and our own value. So hopefully now this $1,000 a month seems actually very reasonable, and it really is. It would make us all stronger, healthier, mentally healthier, less stressed out, give our kids a better chance to learn, would supercharge our regional economy. But the big piece of it is trying to push how we even define our own economic success. So one of the jokes or questions I ask people is, how many of you were excited about GDP when you woke up this morning? And you're like, oh, I hope I make a contribution today, even though it's a Sunday, and I get something done. Corporate profits are at record highs in this country, also at record highs in the United States. Stress, financial insecurity, student loan debt, even drug overdoses and suicides. It has gotten so bad now that American life expectancy has declined for 3 years in a row. First, well, when is the last time that happened in American history? 1918, the Spanish flu that killed millions. That is the last time American life expectancy declined for 3 years in a row. We are back there now because suicides and drug overdoses have each overtaken vehicle deaths for the first time in American history. It is not normal for life expectancy to decline in a developed country for even 1 year, let alone 3 years in a row. We are falling apart. But GDP is setting new record highs all the time. So I have to ask you all, if GDP and corporate profits are at record highs and we're dying earlier, like, which do we value? Now, instead of having these corporate profits as like the measurements that are beating us up on TV every day, they're like, hey, GDP's up, stock market price is up, and you're supposed to feel good about it, even though you feel like, well, that has very little to do with me. We should actually, what could we measure that would actually get you excited if I said it got better in Marshalltown or Iowa?
Clean water.
Clean air and clean water, right? If that got better, you'd actually be happy. What else?
Freedom from substance abuse.
Mental health and freedom from substance abuse. If I said, look, right now 8 Americans are dying of drug overdoses every hour. It's unconscionable. And that was a disease of capitalism as well, because Purdue Pharma and these companies made tens of billions of dollars by dispensing opiate prescriptions, hooking our people. Opiates, or oxy, went to heroin and fentanyl, and then it spiraled out of control. And this is the darkest thing. Purdue Pharma, this company that made tens of billions of dollars on oxy, it went around saying OxyContin's non-addictive, if you can believe that. And then when their patent was coming due, they actually turned it around and said it's actually super addictive. Because then it made more money for them if they said it was super addictive, because then they were going into generics and they started selling like a tamper-proof version of it because their patent on the original had expired. Like, that is the darkness that is our current system. So if we had measurements that said, look, we have 8 Americans dying of opiates every single hour, like that's unconscionable. We need to get that down in half. And one of the, or the zero, and one of the other proposals I'm championing is that if this was a public failure at the highest levels, which it was, then when someone's addicted to fentanyl or heroin or oxy, and we catch them with it, we should be referring them straight to treatment and counseling and not to a jail cell. And one of the reasons why I realized this was because a high school senior in Storm Lake here in Iowa told me that his classmates had fentanyl patches on their shoulders and were already addicted. And he said, what can we do? They would never actually admit to their problem because they'd be afraid of getting into trouble. And so I heard this and I was like, he's right. Like, we have to let people who are struggling with addiction know that if they want to step up and seek help, that they're not going to end up with a criminal record or in a jail cell. Obviously, if you're selling, you're dealing, then you're going to jail. But if you were an addict and you're struggling, then we should not be sending you to a prison cell. We should be sending you to treatment. So this is how we can actually redefine the rules of the 21st century economy to work for us. We invented this gross domestic product, this GDP measurement 100 years ago. And even the inventor said 100 years ago, he said, this is a terrible measurement for national well-being and we should never use it as that. He said that 100 years ago. And here we are 100 years later riding it off a cliff. Robot trucks will be tremendous for GDP. They'll be very, very bad for the truckers and the retail workers and all the communities that those jobs sustain. So we need to actually align our people and the measurements. And we do that by saying the new measurements of economic progress are health and life expectancy and mental health and clean air and clean water and how our kids are doing. And as your president, I will upgrade GDP to these new measurements called the American Scorecard, and then I'll present these real measurements to you all every year at the State of the Union. I'm going to be the first president to use a PowerPoint deck at the State of the Union. I hope that's appealing. Then you'll actually have numbers and they'll be like, hey, this is where it's going. And then we can actually see what the real problems are and invest our resources and energy towards moving the country forward in a way that would be reflected in our own lives. So this is the only way out, Iowa, because we're in a time of unprecedented technological change. And if we persist in evaluating ourselves and our own value and worth by what the market says we are worth, we are lost. We're going to lose on an epic scale. You know? Like the software that's coming out. I know some of the most advanced technologists in the country, like friendly with them. And the more they know, the more concerned they are. It is not a situation where someone's like, I know what the cutting edge looks like, and it's going to be fine. Those two things do not go hand in hand. The people who know what the cutting edge looks like are very, very deeply concerned and very, very anxious. And the best among them have said to me, look, Andrew, an environment where people feel like they're being left behind is bad for everyone. You know, like we have to actually make everyone feel included in some of these innovations that we're working on. Again, I love coming here to Iowa because you are some of the only people in the country that can actually make this statement, make this difference to the rest of our country very, very quickly. The media is not going to help us. It's going to have to be you. You're the only people that can make this case. But this message that we can send next February, oh my gosh, it's going to be so powerful if we actually present this vision to the country and say we can rewrite the rules to work for us. We can build a new way forward for the entire country. So I'd love to take some questions from you all, but I'm going to leave on it's like sort of my closing stanza, which is that Donald Trump in 2016, he said he was going to make America great again, and then what did Hillary Clinton say in response?
It's already great.
America's already great. Remember that? That did not work on many, many Americans. So even though Donald Trump got many of the problems right, his solutions were the opposite of what we need. What were his solutions? We're going to build a wall. We're going to turn the clock back. We're going to bring the old jobs back. Iowa, we have to do the opposite of these things. We have to turn the clock forward. We have to accelerate our economy and society as quickly as possible. We have to evolve in the way we think about ourselves and our work and our value. And I am the ideal candidate for that job because the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes math. Thank you very much, Marshalltown. So some people here are wearing math hats. Math is an acronym. It stands for Make America Think Harder. And that is what you must do come February. So, sir, you have a question?
What about people abroad who are basically making goods at a low wage and feeding into the system where AI and high tech rarely go?
That's true.
The second question is, what's stopping my landlord from raising my rent to what I'm paying plus $1,000? Why not use an algorithm to locally determine wage rather than 1,000 across the board?
So if you look at what's happening internationally with automation, America is somewhere in the middle in terms of the expected impact. The fact that we're a wealthier country actually works against us because the incentives to automate labor are much higher. You know what I mean? Like if you have a worker getting paid $17 an hour in a factory floor in America, and then in Indonesia, maybe they're getting $2 an hour. In Indonesia, you're just like, yeah, whatever. like let them keep on doing their thing. And then in America, they're like, ooh, we can get rid of people. That's like a big cost savings. So the technology's impact will be uneven based on the industry, the environment, and frankly, the cost of labor. Now, your question about trying to scale it and tailor it based upon where someone is, what the cost is, there are many benefits to having it be a universal $1,000, in part because it would be very, very hard to administer if you varied it by cost of living. Because we all know how Americans operate. There'd be a lot of people who are like, ooh, I live someplace like there. Then they'd go someplace else and like, and then try and conserve the cash. That's why we all borrow our friends' Netflix passwords, right? It's like, I can save a couple bucks. No, about your rent question. There are three sources of inflation in American life right now that are driving us nuts. Number one is housing. What are the other two? Healthcare. Education. Those are the big three. If you look at your costs on things like clothing and food and media and electronics and cars, most of those things are actually relatively stable. Another data point, we printed $4 trillion for the Wall Street banks 10 years ago, and there was not, it was like the worst thing. To me, it was like such a fiasco. It affected me so profoundly, I quit my job and started a nonprofit because I said, like, that is totally broken, that we chose the banks over our people. We had a choice then, either keep people in their homes or bail out the banks, and what do we choose? The banks. Yeah, this time we're going to choose our people. That's the situation we're in again. So you have these housing costs, and the education costs, and the healthcare costs going up, and these costs are all going up for different reasons based upon each market. Now, let's say I'm a landlord and I decide to stick it to you and I say, hey, like, I'm going to ratchet your rent up, something awful. The first thing you're going to do is be like, well, let me see if there's another landlord who has not done that. And then let's say all the landlords try to do that. At some point you'd say, wait a minute, if there are 2 adults in your household, you'd be like, look, we're getting like another $2,000 a month. The landlords are all being super jerks. Let's try and find some fixer-upper or some property that we can actually take possession of. And then maybe you even get like a couple of other people and be like, oh, well, the 4 of us, we got $4,000. And the income, the dividend comes with you no matter where you are in the country. One of the reasons why landlords can stick it to us is because we have to live near certain places for employment very often. You know what I mean? This $1,000 a month actually makes us much harder to push around, makes us more mobile and dynamic, because if they push us too far, we can then take the money and put it to use in like terms of pooling to buy a property. One of the reasons why I'm confident about this is that this idea not only was in Martin Luther King and Thomas Paine, a guy named Andy Stern championed this idea, and he's one of the reasons I'm running for president right now. He was the head of a union called the SEIU. Anyone heard of this union? Yeah. Do you remember Andy Stern? Andy Stern was one of the people that confirmed for me that this automation of labor problem was worse than anyone was letting on. Because there are all these technologists who'd written books saying, hey, we're going to automate away a lot of the jobs. But then people tended to look at it and be like, yeah, you're a technologist. Of course you think that. And then Andy Stern, who ran the biggest labor union in the country, said, hey, we're going to automate away all the jobs. And I was like, wait a minute, if the labor guy's saying that and the tech guy's saying that, then it's probably true. And then when I dug into the numbers, I was like, oh yeah, it is true. So one of the reasons why he's championing this freedom dividend is that it makes workers and tenants harder to push around. Because you have this income coming in that is yours and it goes with you wherever you go. So for union members, how many of you all are union members? There are some people here, yeah. For union members, what Andy Stern said was that this would be a built-in strike fund for all union members. Because imagine if your union leadership goes to press for higher wages or better benefits, and the company knows that you're all getting this passive income that enables you at least to like scrape by. It's not like you're just going to dip 100% into savings if you go on a strike or have a labor stoppage. Do you think your leaders would be able to negotiate a bit harder? Yeah, so this was Andy Stern's rationale behind the freedom dividend in part. He said it actually empowers workers. It also recognizes the kind of work that my wife does. My wife is at home with our 2 boys, one of whom is autistic. And right now the market values her work at 0. And we all know that's totally messed up because that work is among the most important and challenging work that's being done. So it supercharges our ability to negotiate on our own behalf, and it also recognizes the work that's being done in our homes and communities every day. I like to go man-woman in these. So do you guys know each other?
No.
All right, then go fire away.
Holding all things constant, excluding Betsy DeVos in your answer, and excluding anything with active shooters. what are you going to do for the pre-K-12 public education system when you become president?
Are you an educator?
Yes, sir.
What level?
Elementary.
Well, good for you. My younger son's in public school, and there are so many things that I feel we should do to help kids like my son and students around the country and the teachers. So number one, we need to pay teachers more. And that's not just like a feel-good thing. The data clearly shows that a good teacher is worth his or her weight in gold, and that the best way to enlist and retain teachers is to compensate them more. The second thing is that having higher teacher-to-student ratios is good for the students. That if you have classrooms of 30 kids, then the teacher often has to do more behavior management than education, and it's not as ideal for the kids, so we should hire more teachers. So those two things go hand in hand. The third thing is we should de-emphasize the SATs and standardized tests that make it so that teachers are constantly having to teach to the test instead of doing what they think is best for the kids in the classroom. Do you all know that we invented the SAT during World War II as a way to identify who not to send to the front lines? You're laughing, it's true. You can look up that history. And now we treat our kids like every year is wartime. And it stresses them out, and it makes teachers, unfortunately, like it distorts your behavior in the classroom. At this point, it's doing as much harm as good. And we need to let our kids know, look, there are other ways to evaluate you than like filling out these like bubble cards and Scantron sheets. Number 4, we have to acknowledge that college is not for everyone, and we have to stop overselling college at the K through 12 level. Right now, we say college is for everyone, but only 33% of Americans are going to attend college and graduate. What we need to do instead is we need to invest in apprenticeship, vocational, and technical training. Only 6% of American high school students are in technical tracks right now. In Germany, that's 59%. Think about that gulf. And a lot of those jobs are the jobs that are much harder to automate. Can you imagine what it would take to make a robot plumber? That's going to be a human plumber for a long time. No? I mean, it's actually easier to automate away some of like the basic, like accounting or like, it's like some of the basic cognitive rules-based stuff than it is the technical work, like HVAC repair and plumbing and these other things. The problem is that it's more costly to educate our kids in the trades, and so we just take the easy way out. We're like, oh, let's pretend you're going to go to college and throw some textbooks in there and then overprescribe college. It's one of the reasons why kids are going to college. They feel like that's the only path to success. We burden them now with $1.6 trillion in student loan debt. College has gotten 2.5 times more expensive in the last number of years. It has not gotten 2.5 times better. So we need to try and scale that back, stop overselling college. And then if you imagine that high school is meant to actually train citizens and people as much as like future college students, then you'd want to introduce different subject areas like financial literacy and social and emotional learning. You know what corresponds very powerfully to success in life? Arts education. Arts actually is super powerful. You all know a school district, first thing they cut is arts, but the data actually shows the opposite to be true. So these are the things that we should be trying to invest in teaching our kids. Right now, our kids have this sinking feeling that they're learning a lot of stuff that's not very relevant for their futures. They're learning a lot of stuff they can just look up on their smartphone. And so we need to try and teach them things that are more relevant and useful for them, not just in this academic track, but really in life. So there are a lot of things that I would do in K through 12. The biggest thing after I said all of that is that the data shows that 2/3 of our kids' academic performance is determined outside of the school. And educators like you know this. It's like we say to you, it's like, hey, teach our kid, teach our kid. And then you're like, hey, I can only control about 1/3 of your kid's performance. Like the 2/3 is from parental time spent with the child and words read to them before they even showed up to school on day 1, stress levels in the household, type of neighborhood, type of home. And so right now we're holding teachers to an impossible standard. We're saying teach our kids even though you can only control 1/3. And then we're pumping money into our schools at a national level and being like, why isn't this working? And the reason it's not working is because the other 2/3 is where we should be putting the resources. If we put money directly into the parents' and the family's hands, then the kid actually will show up with a much better chance to learn and give our teachers a better chance to teach. So that's actually the biggest thing we could do in addition to the other things that I'd mentioned. But I'm very passionate about the fact we need to rebuild public education in this country because we have let it essentially stagnate over a long period of time. And thank you for being a teacher, an elementary school teacher. Let's give her a round of applause. You guys already got a mic in his hand. I can't really,
Hey, thank you for coming out. I just want to start by saying, yeah, I've been working in software, doing machine learning, and I agree, it's scary.
Oh, really? Yeah. Really? You've been working where?
Doing machine learning and doing the software stuff.
So machine learning is like the training artificial intelligence algorithms.
Right, doing the AI stuff. So yeah, just the automation and all it's scary. But yeah, the other big issue that I've heard you address is big agriculture and this monolithic system, and how we need to kind of align the incentives another way to get away from that, and how we can get back to doing local agriculture, and, more nutrition, less pesticides, less hormones, and it's just so much healthier for everybody. So it's really, I love the Freedom Dividend because it's really going to help people do that in rural America and kind of embrace that and build that up. So if you could speak a little bit more about that, and it's so great that, like, I don't know, one of the big things that's coming out lately is Monsanto. We finally, all these court cases.
That company's so evil.
They're so bad, right?
Man. Yeah, they're so bad.
They're offering $8 billion to these 10,000 plus cancer victims, and
yeah, it sounds like it's something they would do.
And so now we've got a chance to start doing things the right way and realign these incentives. I've read through your regenerative agriculture plan and your climate policy. I think that's great. So just, yeah, if you could share a little more about that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, man, I would love to. Thank you for that. And I got to say, I haven't seen the camo Yang Gang hat. Right? That's so cool.
Yang Gang, New York.
I was like, where do you even get that? I've never even seen that before. No. So what's happened to your farms is an emblem of what the heck is going wrong in our country. It was like the giant corporations have gobbled up the family farms. Americans still have this, we all know, out of date reception of a farm as a place where animals run around and people, and then what it looks like in real life now. In real life, it's this freaking giant industrial operation with pesticides and it's very hard for a multi-generational farming family to pass that on to the next generation because they look up and say, wait a minute, is this really the family's future? And it's having profound effects on our health, on our environment. Again, this is how it's all just worshiping the almighty dollar, and then it just chips away at our well-being over time. And so the goal has to be to try and redo our food and nutrition chain. The first big thing, and people have said this, it's we make unhealthy food so much cheaper and easier to get in this country. You know what I mean? My younger son loves McDonald's. He calls it Old McDonald. We drive by one, he's like, hey, can we go to Old McDonald? And we're like, sure. I grew up in the 80s. I love McDonald's. And so we go into Old McDonald and he's running around. And then I'm like, you can buy 4 McNuggets for $1? What? I mean, that was the kind of pricing that existed when I was growing up. And I was like, how the heck is the price the same 25 years later? So that is the set of incentives we created for families, where it's the cheapest food is the worst for you and the worst for your kid. And so the single biggest way we can try and improve our own food supply and food chain is if you put buying power into our hands, then families can make different sorts of choices. And then if you're in a food desert or a produce desert, which many communities are in, if people have more buying power, then maybe the fresh grocer actually opens in your neighborhood because it's hey, you can actually afford some kale or romaine lettuce or fresh fruit and the rest of it. I'm a really big structural incentives guy. And I think what's gone wrong in America today, we have the worst incentives for everybody. And then we pretend they should do the right thing, even though their incentives are over here. I'll give you a basic example. I've run businesses. We say it's oh, you should treat your workers well. You should make them full-time employees. You should give them healthcare coverage. But all of your incentives are in the other direction. all of your incentives are to say, you know what, those Uber drivers are not really employees. Doesn't matter how many hours they drive. They're like contractors, and they don't need health care coverage. The rest of it, that's like all of your incentives go in that direction. It's the same with food and parenting and like treating our kids and getting like the right food supply chain. It's like, hey, you should do the right thing, but we're just going to make it much, much easier for you to do the wrong thing. So the question is, how do you actually make the incentives actually match up to what we would want for ourselves? It starts by giving us a share in the 21st century economy so that we can actually make meaningful choices. Because right now we're pretending we can make meaningful choices, but we're cash strapped and living paycheck to paycheck and like borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. We're pretending we have choices where the big tech companies are concerned. We don't. We just like scroll down and say I agree and then hope for the best, hope they're not abusing us. So back to the food supply, like I'm passionate about this because what's happened on your farms here in Iowa is happening in industries across the economy, really. It's like the mega consolidation. Monsanto is a very bad actor. Unfortunately, every industry has its Monsanto at this point. Sorry, that was a bit of a tirade. Sorry about that. I hope I answered the question.
That's good. Thank you.
No problem, man. Really. We going man, woman, so it's you. Yes, I think, right? Yes. As in there was no other woman that had a hand up at this at the moment.
I'm curious as to what your proposal is to rein in the incredible price increases on life-sustaining prescription drugs such as insulin.
Yes, please. I can't tell you, I've heard so many heartbreaking stories of Americans like giving up food or heating oil so they could afford life-saving drugs. And it's unnecessary, it's immoral, it should not be happening in this country. I've got a 4-part plan to break the backs of these drug companies who are gouging us at every level. Did you all know that the government isn't even allowed to negotiate for lower drug prices on our behalf because the lobbyists are so powerful? So number one, you say, look, of course we can negotiate for lower prices on our own behalf. Number two, drug companies have to charge us what they charge citizens of other countries. Sounds obvious. They regularly charge us 2, 3, 4 times what they charge citizens of other countries, despite the fact that we subsidize the drug development in the first place. Imagine this. Like this is the ridiculousness. We pay for the drugs development. They then gouge us and use the drugs we help them develop and sell it more cheaply overseas. So number one, we negotiate for lower prices. Number two, you have to charge us what you charge other countries. Number three, if you fail in number two, then we can appropriate a license of that drug. And then number four, we can manufacture that drug in a public facility to save consumers money. Do you think that drug companies would all of a sudden get prices under control if these were the tests? Again, it's the same thing where you say to them, it's like, hey, do the right thing. Drug companies don't care about us. They don't care about our health. They don't care about someone making heartbreaking choices. They just care about the bottom line. So what you have to do is you have to tie doing the right thing to the bottom line, then all of a sudden their behavior will change. And I will tell you exactly what their argument will be against this. They will say, President Yang, this is unacceptable because with these incentives, we will A, not be able to make money, and B, not be able to invest in research of new life-saving drugs. And I will call, there are kids here, so I will call BS on both of these things. Number one, their profits are at record levels right now, like really beyond anything that anyone has ever seen in any other industry. Number two, they don't even do their own drug research anymore. They don't. They're like their labs, they were like, hey, this inventing things, too hard. So you know what they do now? They buy the drugs from the biotech startups after they pass a certain level of FDA examination and approval. They're essentially financial operators at this time. Like the drug companies, they used to have a bunch of PhDs in the labs like working on stuff and compounds. They don't even do it anymore, it's too hard. So now they're like, hey, you know how we can stick it to everyone? We buy a bunch of lobbyists, we gouge the American people, and then anytime there's a promising drug in a pipeline, we snap it up, we buy it for 40 cents on the dollar, and then we market the heck out of it. You know what else I would do away with? And I know some of you might not like this. I would do away with those TV advertisements for drugs. There are only 2 countries that allow those advertisements, us and New Zealand. The other countries are like, hey, you know what? If you need the drug, your doctor will tell you about the drug. And then to get a prescription. That's what happens in every developed country in the world except for here in New Zealand. Why? Because here the drug companies just have figured out, it's like, you know how we're going to make some more money? We're going to like put TV ads. Anyway, don't get me started. So yeah, that's how we get the prescription drug prices down, like a 4-part plan. Yeah. You can grab this.
My friends are concerned about public support systems being withdrawn after the UBI is implemented, like after your presidency or something like that, leading to worse outcomes for those in need. How will you address this concern?
By Alaska's example because the Freedom Dividend has been popular there for decades. And this is a state, it's a deep red conservative state that doesn't love taxes. Like a majority of Alaskans said they would accept higher taxes to fund the dividend because they love it so much. So the Freedom Dividend exists as a foundation for everyone, but then there are still going to be problems all under the sun around our mental health and housing and the environment and our food supply. And so the way I liken it is like, if you have a foundation, you don't stop building. Like you put the foundation down and then you start trying to build a structure, like to solve the various problems. The thing I'm most excited about is that just the way the petroleum dividend has stood for decades across administrations, the Freedom Dividend would sustain for generations as well, and it would actually, if anything, make the public appetite for ways to solve these problems higher. Because here's what's going on right now in American life. I say, hey, I'm like, that person's getting something. You're like, oh, they're getting something? That maybe that means I can't have it because we're in like a zero-sum game. You get it, I don't. In this world, it's like everyone's getting a certain amount. And you're like, okay, that's cool. And then the mindset of scarcity that naturally makes us think that like, oh, if someone else is getting it, I'm losing out, lightens a bit. And then if you see that someone else has a problem and they're getting something, then maybe it doesn't bother you as much because you're like, okay, that makes sense. This is, I believe, one of the things that's resulted in Alaska is that you've had this constant dividend that has helped reduce income inequality. And if you reduce income inequality, then your sense of collective desire to have policies that solve problems, the studies I've seen actually goes up. Income inequality is very, very bad for getting things done in a society. Like you wind up with much more class division and strife and struggle. If you have lower income inequality, which there would be with a Freedom Dividend, then hopefully we can actually come together on some of the solutions. But I really don't think it's going to somehow gut the appetite for other programs and solutions. Man, woman, yes.
Hi, Andrew. I was a Bernie Sanders supporter in 2016, and I still love him to this day. But I think after having Trump for president for the last several years, I'm more of a realist. And the reason I'm not with Bernie is because I'm not sure that these things can actually, like his ideas can actually be passed. You know, like. Yeah. I just don't see it actually happening as much as I would love it. How will you get your policies, and especially the Freedom Dividend, through Congress and the House?
Well, thank you for the question. I was a Bernie fan too, and I think he's a hero. I'm so glad to see him doing so well. Like I was next to him in the debate stage, and I was like, wow, like you seem really, really strong, which is great. I think one of the things that happened because of Bernie's health episode is that they've really cut back on his appearance schedule and his travel in a way that I think is very, very positive. Like, because before I think it was just like, you know, they just had him, anyway, that's aside. So here's the vision. My campaign raised $10 million last quarter in increments of only $30 each. So my fans are almost as cheap as Bernie's. But there's no corporate PAC money. It was all grassroots support. It's one reason why people feel like I'm a good bet to break the backs of the drug companies and the Monsantos of the world is that like there's no corporate money behind the campaign. So imagine this grassroots revolution comes up. We win Iowa. The headlines February 4th are like, what just happened? Like, who won Iowa? What's going on? This mug's on like, you know, newspapers like around the world being like, yeah, that guy's, anyway. Then New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina. And then the Democrats and progressives look up and are like, wait a minute, like he's actually a very strong bet to beat Donald Trump. Because if you dig into the numbers, I'm one of only 2 candidates, and the other one is Bernie Sanders, that in one poll, 10% of Trump voters said they would support in the general election. I'm peeling off Trump supporters and independents and libertarians because they sense that I'm non-ideological. So the Democrats at a certain point say, wait a minute, our #1 criteria for a nominee is beating Donald Trump. And it turns out that Andrew Yang is actually the best bet to beat Donald Trump by the numbers. So then I run against him, we win, and then I come into DC January 2021 saying, hey, everyone knows how I won. It's the Freedom Dividend. America wants that Freedom Dividend. They want that tech check. Democrats and progressives will be like, well, I love the dividend because it's going to make children and families stronger and healthier and mentally healthier and everything. But then the Republicans in Congress are going to look at it and say, wait a minute. This helps rural areas. This helps red states on the interior. This helps places that have gotten blasted by automation and lost manufacturing jobs. Am I really against the dividend? You imagine Mitch McConnell standing there and being like, this cash is going to hurt you. You know what I mean? It's like really hard to make that argument. Then, and then you go to Kentucky. Can you imagine? So this will be the fun part. I'm your president, thanks to you all. I'm your president. I'm like, hey, it's dividend time. Let's rebuild our economy from the ground up. And then Mitch McConnell's in Kentucky being like, I don't like it. And then I go to Mitch's district in Kentucky, and we have like a rally or gathering. Do you know what his offices and phone lines are going to look like? You know what I mean? People are going to be like, Mitch, you're standing between us and the dividend. What are you doing? And the thing is, Republicans and conservatives do not mind the dividend. Alaska was passed by a Republican governor. What Republicans and conservatives hate is big government making your decisions for you. That's what conservatives hate. Conservatives do not hate economic freedom and independence and autonomy in the hands of people to make our own decisions. I do not need 80% of Congress to pass the Freedom Dividend. I just need a majority. It's just a law. So then you get that majority, you pass the dividend, the American people have this very unfamiliar feeling where they're like, wow, this is like really great. I really like this. And then I look at the Republicans and say, okay, let's see what else we can get done. And Republicans actually see me as someone they could work with because I'm non-ideological. I'll have a bipartisan team. I'm not someone who's just going to appoint Democrats up and down. And we can get things done. In many ways, so I made the joke about the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes math. But the opposite of a very, very polarizing president is someone who actually just wants to solve problems and work with anyone. People have described me as like a realigner or a shuffler because a lot of the things I'm advocating for don't fall strictly along one party or the other. Like I'm just solutions oriented, very data driven, just want to solve problems. So this is a very long-winded way of saying I believe I can get the dividend passed and I can get a lot of other solutions across the finish line. Yeah, sir.
Yes, I really appreciate your ability to infuse your speech with humor, because I think politics is not only a battle of ideas, but it's also a battle of showmanship and being able to beat Trump. And I don't see that in a lot of the other candidates. But the problems I have with some of your ideas so far is, one, I've heard that one of the ways you're going to pay for your Freedom Dividend is that anybody who's already receiving assistance from the government, like food stamps or disability, will not be qualified, or it'll subtract from their ability to get the Freedom Dividend. And the second one is that you support thorium nuclear reaction as a climate change, to fight climate change. So those are my two problems with being able to really fully support you.
Oh, well, thank you first for the humor aspect. I appreciate that.
It's necessary. It really is. Somebody has to have the charisma and the ability to put on a more appealing display of their person than Trump does.
Well, thank you, and I do agree with you that I think that style is going to be very important because Donald Trump, as we all know who he is, he's like very, very blustery and combative. And I think if the Democrat goes in and tries to like out serious, like earnest him, like it may not go that well. Like Hillary Clinton, I thought beat him in the debates on the merits, but then stylistically it like kind of felt like, that sort of thing. Whereas I believe me against Donald Trump, like I believe I would make him seem somewhat ridiculous. Right. Now, to the point about existing benefits, I think most people can tell the last thing I want to do is take anything away from anyone. I do think that there are certain existing programs that do have incentives attached to them that are not great. And when I talk to people who are in some of these programs, they actually are constantly somewhat anxious about having those benefits reduced or taken away because there are various administrative requirements that accompany them. But I would not touch a single program. You are right that if you opt into the Freedom Dividend, you'd be foregoing certain benefits from certain cash and cash-like programs.
Don't those people need it the most?
Yeah, and to me, there are, this is a foundation. I am completely open to expanding programs and trying to help solve problems for those who need it more. But it's a very legitimate point of view, and I don't disagree with you. The second thing on thorium is climate change. To me, how many of you all are concerned about climate change? If you're gonna raise your hand on this, yeah, everyone. If you don't have your hand up, you definitely should. Was there anyone? I see you. He's not that concerned about it. We'll work on him after. That if we're in a crisis, then we need to consider all options on the table, and that to me includes considering next generation nuclear energy as a way to manage our energy consumption. And thorium is superior to uranium as a fuel source on many levels. It's not intrinsically radioactive, it degrades faster, you can't make weapons out of it. And so to me, if we don't explore this next generation technology, we're leaving a potential solution off the table. But again, I understand the perspective on it because some people just dislike anything with the word nuclear in it. And I understand that too. But thank you so much for all three of your comments because I don't disagree with any of them really. One last question, then selfies. If anyone wants those things. Do we have goodies and maybe books or anything else for the good people here? How many, so I wrote a book. I don't know if we have copies for them, if anyone I love being in Iowa because I can give my book away like it's candy. That makes as an author, that makes me feel very, very happy. Sorry, here you go.
Thank you. Would you consider a transfer period, months or years, for people who receive other public support when they opt into UBI in order to transfer, or to ease that transition?
Well, it's a very similar question that he'd asked, and 100% yes. Again, I do not want to pull a rug out from anyone. And so it could even be that there's an overlap period where you actually can try out the Freedom Dividend, you have a transition period, and then if you wanted to, you could be like, hey, it turns out I actually preferred some other suite of programs. I am someone who wants to do more, not less. Let's put it that way. The last thing I want to do, the task ahead of us right now is to rewrite the rules of the 21st century economy to work for us. And to let our fellow citizens know, the biggest lie in American life right now is that we don't have the money, we don't have the wealth. I've done the math. I mean, we're up to 21 trillion in GDP. We have the money. Again, I mean, do you all remember them complaining about where the money was when they wanted to bail out Wall Street to the tune of 4 trillion? I don't remember that. No one was like, oh, do we have the money for this? As it is, what they did is they pulled the lever and hoped we didn't even notice. Now, they called it quantitative easing. Who the heck knows what quantitative easing is? Nobody. Oh, you guys know, because you're paying attention. And so now it's time for us to build a trickle-up economy, and then people are going to look up and be like, oh, where do you get the money for this stuff? It's like, oh, we have the money. So we have the money to help rebuild our communities and our families, and then to the extent that there are people in individual situations of need, we have the resource to be able to help them solve those problems too. Let's make history together in 2020. Thank you all so much, Marshalltown. I love Iowa because you have this power. Let's use it. Let's use it for our kids and our future generations. Thank you so much. And it's picture time. Where am I going to be? Right back here by the flag. That makes sense. Thank you. Cool. Oh, wow. It's Martin Luther King. Oh, thanks. I was going to drop. Thanks for getting it. Yeah, it's 3D. Really?
Yeah.
Hey guys, can you start the picture line over here, please? No, you
guys are fine. No, you're fine. First up. Do you want to get in there? Sure. Of course. I'll stay here, miss. I think you're on. I like it. Thank you both for being here.
You got that? Yes, 1 second. You guys are in the background of the photo.
No, you're in the background of his photo.
Okay, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3. One more. Okay. 1, 2, 3. It's actually really cool. Thank you so much. Thank you. Hello, hello.
Hi, my name is Preston.
Yeah, you definitely could, Preston. Is there anything else I can do for you? Hey, Ty, can we get some books over here if we have them? Brown? Yeah, they took the rest of the books out. Where are they taking to? I don't know. Thank you, Preston. I'll see you soon. May you invoke my re-election. How old are you? Just go. Oh, yeah, it's going to have to be the election after that somehow. Thank you, Preston. It's nice meeting you. No, it's all right. Thank you, Bill. Nice to see you. Good to see you, too. Yeah. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, man. Oh, you're good. Yeah, I love everything you do, man.
Oh,
AI
thank
forever
you.
and UBI forever.
Okay, I'm 3 guys. Wait, you were on the UBI before me, too?
Maybe.
Nice.
Yeah.
No, you probably
Oh, yeah.
were. 'Cause I'm like not, I wasn't that early to it.
Yeah, no, I've been seeing technology grow. It's pretty crazy.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Teslas drive themselves.
Hey, how are you? How old are you?
Good. I'm 15.
Oh, you can both
He made me come.
Realize. Oh, really? Then thank you. Twice over.
His name's Finn.
Hey, Finn. Thank you. That's how the magic happens, Finn.
Oh yeah, and I just want to thank you for actually answering people's questions because I went to a Kamala rally last night and I asked her a question and she completely dodged it.
Oh,
It was so like insincere.
I only know one way to answer questions, man. It's just try and answer it. Thanks, Finn.
Thank you.
Hey, John. It's good to meet you too. I hope you feel like Finn did right by bringing you here today.
Oh, I enjoyed it.
Oh, good.
It was a lot better than last night's.
Yeah. Last
Oh, good. Do you have a camera, or did he have it?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'll get my picture with you. I can take it.
Oh yeah.
Well, let's get both of you. Ty.
I can put this next to my Bernie picture.
It's good.
Me and Bernie, we got together one time.
Yeah, Bernie's a great patriot.
Yes, he is.
1, 2, 3. Nice. Thank you both for being here. Appreciate it. Especially you, Finn.
I'll vote for your re-election.
I like it.
If for some reason, in the off chance you don't happen to win the presidency, are you going to regroup and come back in 2024?
The plan is to win, but on
the off chance.
But the plan is to solve the problems, and unfortunately, the problems aren't going anywhere. And neither am I. And neither are my kids. You know what I mean?
So yeah, that means you're coming back.
That means I'm going to keep grinding till the problems actually have a solution.
Keep going, man. Thank you.
Oh wow, it is 3-dimensional.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, you were right. Hello. Thank you.
Thank you for following me on Twitter.
No problem.
And I want to give a shout out to the Yang Gang. We love this man. I've got a lot of selfies with him already, but we gotta get one more.
And I'll give you the silver.
Please sign my hat.
So I followed you on Twitter. Do me a favor and DM me because I owe you something.
All right, I'll see you in the beta.
Thank you. Really? Okay.
Hi, Jim Chance, President here at Local 893. My fiance Janet.
Congratulations.
We were down in West Virginia Friday night also. A couple tables back from the stage there, so that was very
Were you near my wife by chance? I don't know if you saw her.
No.
Right, she was at the table. So if I was here, the cameras were here, my wife was there.
I believe.
Of course, I got a microphone too.
Okay.
Do you guys have a wedding date?
No, not at the moment.
You guys have a wedding place?
It's gonna be an outdoor wedding. It's going to be an outdoor one and a very small.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Very small ceremony.
For what it was worth, my wife and I were engaged for a while. Can you spell your names right?
I'm Jim. And Janet.
Janet, you got it. Thank you, Janet. I have seen all kinds.
I did want to say one thing. I've been a nurse for 20 years, and I think
Yes. That's all right. You know, we are literally opiated, Janet. It's really crazy.
I mean, a lot not to mention Ward and so many drugs.
I would, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Thank you for all you do to make people stronger and healthier. And I think nurses make the world go around.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's so great to meet you.
Hi, Andrew. Good, how are you?
Good to see you, man.
They're building an Amazon fulfillment center down the street from his house. Big Smile 131, 2, 3. And
What town is that?
Bondurant. It's like 2 minutes south or around Altoona.
Wow, I gotta check that out.
Yeah, they just flattened it out and they're starting to build it. So it's going to be pretty worrying because they're planning on hiring 1,000 people plus.
Yeah.
Then, you know, the jobs are just going to...
They're going to hire 1,000 people plus, and then they're going to start bringing the robots, and the 1,000's going to start building it out. That's the way that's their playbook. Yeah. Thank you, man. It's great to meet you. Thank you. Yeah. Appreciate the rest of your day. Good looking man. Thank you. Thank you for your service.
Can we get our picture taken without me? Okay, thank you. My name is Miss Springtree, so you're the man that's making this happen. I would like to have the answer to that. I would request Mr. Keys
I'm actually certified to
Thank you, sir. That means a lot. Thank you. Thank you. Well, you have good taste in candidates, because I supported Bernie last time. I like Joe this time.
But you're going to beat him.
Well, I believe we have a lot of energy behind this campaign, and we have all these irons in the fire that are going to light up in the next number of days.
Yeah, I think you do. This is what I heard was phenomenal.
Thank you, sir. It means a lot, because you've heard us all. And you should know, me and Joe are very aligned. Thank you very much. Thank you for your service again.
How's it going, Andrew?
Communist capitalism, look at that!
Yeah, my boy from Las Vegas hooked me up. I'm actually from small town Missouri, so
oh, really?
It's a pleasure to get to
Big smiles.
Pink shirt. Thank you very much.
It's great to see you. You want me to sign your hat?
That would be amazing. Thank you.
I think I've got a silver somewhere.
Oh, that would be great. I actually only had my big fat with my Cali grandma buddies, and so they spoiled me on this hundred times. I'm going to try to make it count.
Thank you for making it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Take care.
Yeah, I was making history. Thanks so much.
Let's try.
Hi there, very nice to meet you.
You too.
Just, you want to get high five?
It's okay, it's okay.
I just got to say thank you so much on behalf of her and all of our future generations. The ideas that you're sharing are what we need now more than ever. So thank you so much. Allison, you want to smile? Can you say cheese? Cheese. Allison, cheese, cheese, cheese. Can you say high five? Cheese, Freddie. Cheese. Allison, can you say hi? You want to say hi?
Way to be a good sport. It's
yeah.
okay. It's okay.
It's okay.
I know.
Yeah, oh, it's okay. But thank you very, very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Hello.
Hello.
I would like Yeah.
The world is like kind of
I haven't even seen that.
go-to pages, like I'll take you guys.
Yeah.
Like, dude, love it out your work. He loved it. You like
I'm sure. Plus, like, there are parts like they live relatively close to
Talk to him, please talk to him. I was wondering. You're just like my boy. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're strong like my boy. That's good. Oh, I can tell. Ooh, he likes that.
You smile at Daddy? 3.
Smile at Daddy. Come on, Goof. 3's a good age. Better than 2.
At least a dozen in there. It's got to be something.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We really appreciate what you're doing and everything.
Appreciate you. Congrats on the beautiful boy.
Yes, thank you very much. Alrighty.
Yeah, you're smirking a little, aren't you? Oh, man. I miss that age.
I know, it's fun and scary and difficult all at the same time.
Yeah, we got to make it work for him.
I know. Well, I really appreciate what you talk about with teaching young boys, because he has some sensory issues, and he's never going to be able to take a test sitting down. Like, what boys take a test sitting down?
It's so not just him.
No.
I mean, it's like a whole generation.
Yeah.
Oh,
But you're still very successful and you're very intelligent. So
No, seriously.
School's not set up for
Our
everybody.
schools are not set up. Our schools are essentially assembly lines. You go in and you're not like, you know, this cookie cutter and then there's like, like,
If you don't fit the mold, you're done.
so I mean, like, congrats to you, man, because you like, you know, just like transcended it all and left it behind.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thanks for coming.
Appreciate
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for the questions. They're very thoughtful and spot on. Thanks for coming. Hello.
1, 3, guys. 1, 2, 3. Nice.
I hope you do get the sense we want to do much, much more. And the Freedom Dividend does stack on top of Social Security, which would ensure a secure retirement for an additional like hundreds of thousands, even millions of Americans. It's like the biggest expansion. Because Social Security benefits aren't sufficient in my mind. But, you know, it's like, but I appreciate your questions because they were all spot on.
Yep, you're welcome. Is there a way to send you questions?
Yeah, it's Andrew@yang2020.com.
It'll get to you.
Fantastic.
Thanks,
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the heck out of you.
You're welcome.
Did you like the pic?
Oh, good, we got 4, that should be good.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, I will cut some of it out.
I think it's pretty good.
I usually put myself up right under this.
There we go. That's the spirit.
Hi, good to meet you.
Great to meet you as well. Thank you for being here.
You're meeting me.
Of course. Let me get. I got one.
Wherever you
Thanks, Ty. I got it. Yeah. So I'll tell you the authorial place to sign this thing.
Okay.
It's supposed to be on the title page over your name.
Great.
So I'm supposed to do that. What's your name, sir?
Bill.
Oh yeah, don't do that. This happened to me before. Don't do it. I'm telling you, do not do it.
Here you go.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Thank you. So great to see you.
I wish you a lot of luck. I enjoyed seeing you on Meet the Press today.
Oh yeah.
And I hope you get more of the national press. I'd like to see you be able to go on things like Fox News Sunday. I think he's an honest broker. Not necessarily all the other shows, but...
he is an honest broker.
Because I think you've got a good message, and, you know, that's my biggest concern over the next 3 months is, are you going to be able to get the message out to enough people to, you know, be able to bring in a win in Iowa?
That is the challenge.
Because I think in a binary contest, you're the horse to bet on to beat Trump. So good luck.
Thank you very much. And you're 100% right. That is the challenge.
Big smile on 3. 1, 2, 3.
But I'm glad to say you'll be seeing a lot more of us. You know, we're about to go up on TV. There are a bunch of things happening.
Good, great. Good luck.
Thank you very much.
Hi. Thanks for coming to my hometown. I
It's great to
appreciate
be
it
here.
very much.
Thank you.
have this ring young
I remember.
so I can take a picture with it.
Let's do it. Yeah, let's do it.
Smile. Gotta get the flag in the shit. Good.
It's so good to see you again. I remember
Thank you so
signing
much.
your case.
Yeah, thank you.
And then you know, when I saw that, I was like, oh, I'm for her
Yeah,
Friday.
yeah, thank you.
I know, my wife's going to this.
Oh, okay. Smile. Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you do it?
I am.
Because you're like the model, the role model, being like, look.
Yeah.
No, really. But I genuinely agree with you. I have even friends who swear by it, and you can see it on them, just like you can see it on you.
Yeah, not just that, just climate change.
And yeah, just like the hidden cost. And yeah. So you should know, I'm aligned. I'm aligned, man. I'm aligned. My cousin, who's like a sister to me, is like a vegan for a variety of reasons.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great seeing you again. Do you want me to sign your math hat in silver?
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
Sorry about that.
Just
sir.
to thank you, I hope we continue promoting difficult and real understandings rather than, you know, simplicity as the agenda for America, because it's not going to be easy.
I either make a crummy or an excellent politician, and we're going to figure out which of those.
I think you got some two sides going, but I'm hoping that I'm hoping that the real side comes out at the end. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah.
See you soon.
It is a Harry Potter tattoo, yeah.
Good to see you, man.
How's it going?
How are you?
I got a van. I'm doing 48 states for Yang now.
And smile. You got it.
And then I owe you 48 thank yous.
I was wondering if you have time after, if you could come out and sign something.
Yeah.
Get like a decal for it too going.
Is it right outside right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll come outside and make sure of that.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks.
No problem, man. Least I can do. Thank you.
Hey, take this for us, please.
Yes.
Andrew. Hi, Alex. I saw you in Boone, Iowa in March, so it's kind of cool to see you. I mean, you were a nobody then, and now you're.
Well, what I say,
climbing
man,
up,
I was
so-
like an indie rock band. You saw me play the cafe.
That's right.
Got it.
Thank you.
And, and then the venues get a little bigger.
Yeah.
Light shows. A little
I know.
bigger.
So I was just going to tell you again, I teach at high school here in town. Just thanks for, I think the easy thing to say is teacher pay, but I appreciate that you understand the challenges that come with the profession.
I mean, I sense that you're like the cool high school teacher.
Working on it.
and someone like you worth your weight in gold, like and your impact. You probably don't even realize the impact you have because there are all these kids in school that just see you and it's like, wow, like that's what, like that's what we should try and be.
Someday we'll see that.
Yeah, because I remember the impact teachers had on me. Okay.
Yeah. Can you sign this for me?
Of course.
I'm trying to get all my teach government, so
How fun is that?
Any little thing to get the students out, caucuses, appreciate it. So
Shoot me up. Yeah, thank you. I will. And like, heck, I mean, shoot, I have to find a way to speak in your class.
That'd be awesome.
I gotta try and like help you get these kids to caucus.
Yeah, right.
We'll see.
Sorry to bother you. Of course.
I did. It makes me very happy when I've got the silver that actually shows up on the name.
Yeah. Well, take care of yourself.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it. Heck, you. Still good looking.
Thank you.
5 minutes later.
Yeah, have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Oh my gosh! Give me this!
You don't have to run.
It's too late! Oh, what's going on? Which way is the front? I'm right? Alright. He's gonna be quick. He's on a better surface. And he's gonna go over it. Sorry about that. You want me to sign it? Yes, please.
Did you skate?
He's done more than that. He's written it down. Yeah. I mean, I was never like awesome, but do you want black or
Black.
No, it's cool.
Appreciate it.
But yeah, that's what I did. So
Should be a new wall jacket. Awesome.
You want me to sign your hat too? I can get it silver. Oh man, I miss those days. Actually, I wrecked when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I didn't have a helmet on, so I'm like, I took a turn too tight, and I fell. And I like hit the back of my head, and I remember my head ringing.
Oh yeah.
Like nothing I'd ever experienced before. I was like 15 or 16. I was like, am I okay? Like it was like a cartoon character where it's like ringing and there's like the birds flying around your head, like they're looking around. It was like that where I was just like, what is going on?
Been there.
But yeah, so after that, I still didn't wear a helmet because I was an idiot. But whatever. It was the 90s. Who wore a helmet in the 90s? Nobody.
Yep.
Too brave.
Well, thank you. Pleasure meeting you.
Appreciate you. That's what my wife would say, probably.
Man, Andrew, you're killing it.
Hey, I love it. Yeah, silver or black?
Whatever you like.
On that, probably silver.
What I really wanted to also mention was that I think there's such a great opportunity to just propose some real moderate, significant legislation concerning Monsanto, just to follow suit what they're doing in California with safer thresholds, and same thing in EU. There's this like really ultra-toxic mix of like glyphosate, which is a surfactant, and this stuff is all like peer-reviewed research now that it absolutely causes cancer, kidneys, liver disease, even in ultra-low doses. And it's really harmful for the kids because it's like they don't have their kidneys are
Yeah, the systems are more vulnerable.
So they're linking it to like everything that's bad, right? But we definitely got them on the top 3 things of like.
Yeah, I mean, I'm convinced there's something going on with our food supply that is impacting the rates of autism in the communities around the country. You know, you're just seeing like go up and up. And you look at them being like, well, this is definitely not. Like not just like a natural manifestation. Like there's something going on with our food or environment.
Yeah, it's a good opportunity, and you're like leading the crowd on everything. You're shifting the whole conversation to automation now, and I think you can get everybody. Poison's bad, you know. It's such an easy message.
Poison is bad. You know what, man? I'm just gonna tweet something right now and say poison is bad.
Poison is bad. That's right.
Just because.
And so it's like, come on.
This is because I think that's a very important message. That this, you know, what's funny is like this is now my way of like taking notes.
Yeah.
Where if I just poison is bad, then it'll like help spur conversation. From me.
That's great. That's really good. I love what you're doing.
Thank you. We got to pick together, right?
No, we didn't. Let's do that.
Want me to take it for you? And then I need to sign a decal on a Yang band. You need me to sign that book? Sure. Come on over.
Big smile on 3. 1, 2, 3. Nice.
All right. Thank you, brother. You just take it easy, man. Thank you. You're very welcome. What's your name? Jake. Oh, I can also sign your hand if you want. I got the navy. I got the silver and navy, which I'm very glad when I have the silver because I feel like I can. I've been waiting for the silver. Thanks for being patient, man. I appreciate it. It's like, where's the Sharpie game? Oh yeah, of course, man. The third one.
Got it.
Thank you. No problem. Did you want me to sign the shirt too? Looks like you have something.
This is for someone who doesn't want to be on camera.
Yeah, of course.
I don't know where you're going to do it.
Thank you. You're a champ.
Oh, that's okay. Yes, please. What? What's our shirts?
All right.
Got
Hopefully
it.
that's good.
Thank you.
Sure.
That's awesome.
Anything people want. That's pretty good.
Thank you.
Anything you want, that's what you should.
She's going to be in my classroom.
Oh, sure. If you think it's good, that's probably good. I owe that man a signature. Other than that, who's up next? You said the journal is it? Yep.
Yes, I'm in the hallway, so I'm going to be there in a few.
That sounds great.
Hey, Nick Parizos with Aussie.com. I saw you at the press club. I asked you there about economic policy. The other night I asked you about tech jobs, automation. So here I'm asking you about flooding, your flooding plan. You know, obviously it's a huge issue facing Iowa.
Yes.
I don't know if you knew, you know, I was certainly surprised climate change, you know, really could fight the heartland like this.
Yeah.
So, you know, how would your flooding plan, and like how, broadly speaking about flooding in Iowa, like how do you deal with that climate change issue?
Well, so the biggest change we have to make is we have to own up to the devastation that climate change is causing in communities around the country, and then we need to federalize the response.
Okay.
And so if you contextualize the magnitude of the damage of climate change, it will be in the hundreds of billions, perhaps trillions. And oftentimes communities don't have the resources to protect themselves adequately from floods or storms or wildfires. And the costs end up being much, much greater in both human life and economic devastation than if you were to go to that community ahead of time and perhaps erect higher levees or elevate structures or clear underbrush or set controlled fires or make communities more resilient to high winds. So there are many, many things that we need to invest in The big problem right now is that we're leaving communities to fend for themselves in many instances, and we respond after the fact. So we have to become more clear-eyed and proactive about the fact that climate change is here to stay and is already causing catastrophic effects in communities here in the Midwest and across the country.
You mentioned your platform like designated flood zones and things like that, and how they're not effectively being chosen. You know, can you kind of dig into a little bit of that?
So right now in America, we are reactive. And so we have a disaster, and then we say, okay, that was a disaster, and then we clean it up, and then we wait for the next disaster.
Right.
So we have to become more proactive in identifying a place that could become a recurring flood zone, for example, and then adjust development incentives or mitigation measures as a result, because again, climate change is here to stay and it's not going anywhere.
Are you hearing this stuff from people in Davenport, places like that, just as you campaign across the state? Or
what I'm hearing from people across the state is that they're deeply concerned about climate change because they're seeing the effects, and I think that the floods were one of the biggest reminders that the Midwest will be impacted just like every other part of the country. No problem, man. Thank you. See you. Oh, okay. I think you sold it this way. Good old C-SPAN. I actually really like C-SPAN.